Hello everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Scott Chapman, and let's see, a little bit about me. I make JavaScripts for Stratus Data Systems out of New York, so I work remotely in Missoula. I live in Missoula, and then also teach a remote online developer course for the Big Sky Code Academy. So yeah, I do that at night, and then in my free time, you know, I come to conferences. This is fun. How many people is this their first tech conference? Nice, a lot of people. Congratulations, first timer. Woo woo woo. That's great. This is my first time speaking at one, so we got that going for us. So yeah, so this is a picture of me working. No, I'm just kidding. I work remotely, so I wouldn't have the shirt. But yeah, and that's an old computer, but yeah. I wish I had a disk drive inside mine, but whatever. Can't have it all. So we're just going to go over a few scenarios of what kind of challenges we face being a knowledge worker and the ways that we get kind of roadblocked. And then kind of, I'm going to talk about some of those things that we can do to kind of mitigate that. You know, some of it's like real things that I've encountered that can help you get you down the tracks, you know, bust through those roadblocks. Some of it's just theoretical and like, hey, what could we do? And I'd kind of like to transition from speech into a discussion about this, you know, kind of like, because you all have different backgrounds, different stacks that you're working with, so you're going to have different suggestions how to mitigate some of that. So here's a scenario. You're at work, you come upon a bug, and it's a medium priority bug, so you know it's like you don't have to stay there all night. You know, the database isn't down. You know, people can still make transactions on your site or whatever, or the machines are still running, whatever. But then it's the end of the day. You're kind of fried. You know, you've been working, you've been banging it out, squashing bugs and shipping features, and but you're like, so whatever. You know, this is just one more. Put it in the tracking system in Jira or whatever, and then let it go. So then you go home. You know, you can take a jog, you can shower, have a good dinner, and you rest. And the next morning you wake up, and you're like, let me see, yeah. You wake up, you come to work. You might even come a little bit early, and man, you start to get on it. You're just getting in there. You know, you come to your fresh desktop, and you're like just hacking away. You're doing it exactly how you think it would go, and then like 8 o'clock comes, and then someone, you know, your boss is like, hey, remember we got that planning meeting? And you're like, oh, great, planning meeting, you know. So it's like, you know, record scratch, you know. Your productivity is just stopped. And that's fine. I mean, you got to have, you know, you got to figure stuff out. What's the saying? It's like 6 hours of having a meeting or planning can save 3 weeks of programming, you know? Or what is it? No, it's the opposite, right? 3 weeks of programming can save you 6 hours of a meeting. So yeah, you just do the wrong thing for 3 weeks and then be like, oh, I wish I had a meeting about this. So meetings are, you know, it's one of those things. So you get done, you capture a bunch of things, you get some user feedback, and you figure out what the roadmap is going to be. Maybe you adjust milestones or whatever. And so then that happens. Let's say you get done with that about 10:30 or so, or 11. Let's say 11. Because some of these things always go long, right? So we're just going to have a short meeting, y'all. Those don't exist. So, so then you decide, so you come back to the computer, you're like, okay, I'm going to go back, I'm going to get this thing, all right, I get back into it. You know, shake off that meeting. And then you come back and you're like, oh, what was I doing? You know, like, and you have this sea of terminal windows, and then your 50 Chrome tabs open, and you're like, is my server running? What did I do? Where am I? Like, and you're just sitting there like, oh, I hate meetings. Why do we have them in the morning? You know? So then, you know, we got to figure out like what happened there. So one of the things is that tab confetti gets us. You know, that's something that I get a lot. Is it's just like, you know, you're like, okay, what's the API for that? Okay, now how does Docker work again? Like, saying what? And then so you have all of these, what was like a flow, like you're just opening a tab for each one of those things so that you don't have to like think, oh, should I close this tab, or just open them, whatever. Just type in whatever you were thinking, like whatever API you need to access or look up. And then when you come back to that, it's like, what is all of this? Do I need any of it? Like, ugh. So that's fun, little place to be in, where you come to a screeching halt. At least you did something earlier that day. You got that, going for you. But the reason that we have this problem, as far as like we have these barriers of getting back into the work, is because we have evolved to be like very good change, identifiers. We see things changing and we're like, what was that? Like shiny things. So for instance, back in the day, you'd be back, you're skinning your elk or whatever, and then there's like this something on the side in the bushes. Whoa, what's that? Like grizzly attack, watch out. So that used to be really helpful for us, except for now the problem is that I always carry on this little thing made of glass, and it's like, if a bird flies out there, then I'm like, what was that? Like, because it's like, it's kind of off there, or your head moves and like the light catches you or something. What is that? So yes, we carry 2 shiny things at least, and then there's all the people come, if you have an office or if you have an open office, or there's all these things that don't contribute to your life being longer. They're just, but you still have that in you, and it's still worth it for us to survive as a society. And so we got our genetic material passed on because people were distracted by things, or what was that rustle in the bushes, or did you hear that, or oh man, your fan sure is taking off while you're in NPM installing, or whatever. So yeah, we have these barriers to refocusing. And then attention is a limited resource. Like, there for a while it seemed like the 90s and the early 2000s, everyone's like multitasking. How to multitask. 10 ways to multitask. Number 7 surprised me. And now we realized that we weren't multitasking. We were just like looking over here really quickly and then looking over here. And we did it so fast, I looked like we were doing it. It became a blur after a while. But we found out that is not true. And so that's good to kind of, that we finally, it's become mainstream again. Like, hey, you can really only do one thing. And do you want to do that well? How many times do you want to change doing things? So, and then, decision making takes energy. So for each of those tabs, you have to sit there. I mean, if you're curating your Chrome tabs, you're like, oh, do I want to throw this one away? And I just shut the whole thing, like, whatever, just start over, I'll find it. So yeah, they did this study at the University of California, Irvine, and they did some interruption work. So what they found at this end of the study is they found that 82% of all interrupted work is resumed on the same day. So that makes it sound good. Like they're like, yeah, we got, that means like 1/5 of people who get interrupted don't finish that work that day. They're like, whatever. That's a pretty big number. I mean, when you're considering how many shots you're taking at different projects you have going on, all the other things that you have to do at work, like you have a Christmas party planning meeting that you got to do too, and so like you get interrupted by all these things, and like 1/5 of your work isn't being done when it would have been done because of interruptions. And they said here they're trying to make it sound like you're giving us good news and bad news, but for me, I don't think that's good news, the first part. But anyways, here's the bad news: it takes an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds to get back to the task. So in our little previous example, you get back to your desk, you're like, well, it's 11 o'clock, man, I think this thing's gonna take an hour. I got an hour before lunch, and then, almost half an hour into it, you're getting started. And it's like, all right, it's time to go to lunch, and you get back from lunch. Man, I don't know, I'm way better before lunch than after lunch. So, and I think a lot of people are, it's a good time to take a nap, and that's kind of frowned upon in American society generally, especially in the office. Trust me. But, let me talk just a little bit more about the study. It's a pretty fun one. So they had all these people do a task, and they had them answer emails as quickly, politely, and correctly as possible. And so while they did that, they had another person in another room, their supervisor, either using like IM or phone, and they had them interrupt them periodically. Some of it was like normal stuff, like, hey, how many employees, including you, are in the department today? And so they had them doing that, but they were calling them, and then they wanted them to keep doing the emails and stuff. And so they would have, that's a pretty normal question, I guess. I mean, oh yeah, they're a HR. The person that was being tested answering the email was pretending like they were an HR person. So they were mostly HR tasks and emails and stuff like that. And so they would ask them, like, how many employees are, and then they would also ask them other important questions, like, how many hot dogs do we need for 240 employees? Yeah. So that's realistic, but whatever. Now, what's the answer?
360.
360, okay. Let's see, that's good. All right, so they found out that the work was done quicker, but at a price. So like the people actually that were interrupted, they actually did the work quicker. Now some of it isn't necessarily a win because the work getting done quicker meant that a lot of them did was just wrote shorter emails. They just responded shortly, like, all right, done, or like, looks good to me, all right, So, yeah, and I hate to think that, what would happen if this information gets into the wrong hands? Some evil supervisor, like, oh, if we interrupt them more, they'll get done quicker, and then I can also find out how many hot dogs we need, and let's see what else. Oh yeah, people in the interrupted conditions experienced a higher workload, more stress, higher frustration, more time pressure, and effort. So the interrupted work may be done faster, but at a price. And so, yeah, so what happens to these people that you're just overwhelming all the time, and that you hire them to do this specific skill, but then you overwhelm them with all this auxiliary stuff as they're trying to do the work that you paid them to do? I mean, what I've seen is burnout. People just quit. They're like, you know what, it'd be better just not make money than do this, because at the end of the day, they're just like, I'm just going to go drink myself to sleep. So yeah, it's not really a good tactic. And then here's what they said. This was one of their recommended outcomes, was that technology could be used to keep track of and control interruptions over a long period of time, so as not to overload people. So they were basically like, well, we'll just drive them to the edge and just keep them there, just surf the edge of them, burning out and breaking and, shooting up the office or whatever. But, and I don't think that's a good solution. I don't know. What do y'all think? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Yeah? All right. Undecided? All right. Cool. You get that? So yeah, some of the solutions that I would say, like, one of the things that I keep toying with in my mind is, like, instead of having all of the senior people, the people that have the most information, that have the most have the most ability to impact work, don't go to these meetings. Don't get distracted by all this stuff. Like, you let the junior person do a lot of that stuff. Like, go to these meetings. I mean, if you're just collecting customer feedback, you can just do that. That person can do that for you and be that proxy for you, boil it down for you, and then present it to you, and then you can do something with it, or get them to go, get that junior person to work for you, rather than, usually what I see is this: you've got a senior person and a junior person, and then that junior person is just bugging the senior person all the time, like, hey, how do you do this, or what's the build process for this, or whatever. Whereas they could spend a lot more time freeing up that senior person, or the person who's can make a high impact. They can free up that person to do, like, quality work. It even just, so like a lot of times, and the pay disparity is such that you could send that junior person to that meeting 5 times and get it wrong 4 times, and it would be the same price as you paid 3 senior people to go in there. So, but that's something to consider too. Yeah, here's another thing too, is I want to talk about Gibsonian affordances. So it was this person, James Jerome Gibson. So he was positing that things should be designed to have clues on them, clues on how to use them with no sensory processing. Like, see, this is the correct way, and then this is like, what? And everyone's going to pull that because that's the way those work, is they got the handle on them. Whereas the other ones have plates on them, right? Or coffee mugs that have handles on them. It's like, oh, I picked that up. You don't have to think about that, like, where should I pick this thing up? It's just like, oh, there. Or buttons. Like, you see a button, most people don't pull buttons. But yeah, so if you see a button, usually you're just like, oh, I just push that thing, that's it. So those are really good, because then you don't have to make a decision about them. You don't have to use your mental capacity. You don't have to do anything. It just is automatic. So there are ways that we can do that in programming. So for instance, one of the things that I do every day is got to tunnel into this stage database that's somewhere, and into MongoDB and PostgreSQL, and do that. And then like eventually, about probably 4 times a day, one of them will break, the tunnel will break or something, and then I got to redo it, and then I got to be like, what's the string and which ports and all that stuff. Instead, one that I do is just write, like, so for my Mongo connection, it's just like write a bash script called Mongo, and then it's in the my projects folder where I would be opening up any project, and so I just automatically open a tab that has that projects folder, type Mongo or /Mongo, and then boom, it does that. And then if you need passwords, well then iTerm can save your passwords, for your RSA fingerprint or whatever you got going on, and you can just save that, and then that's just muscle memory at that point. That's helpful. And then I have the same thing for PostgreSQL, but I think, thinking about it now, I'm like, well gosh, I should just like have one that's just called database and does both of those, right? Opens up tabs and all that, and but that has helped me a lot because it takes me forever, and I'm like, what is it again? And what do I need to become an expert in SSH or tunneling? Like, I don't think that'd be a good payoff, but it is a good payoff to write that little script, because I know how many times I'm going to do that over the year. It takes, like, even if it took me hours and it took me maybe a minute, to write that script, then even if it took me hours, it would be worth it just for how less tired your brain would be, every day when you have to do that. It's like, it's no brainer. Oh, and then you get happy. You're like, oh, I made that. Woo! You know what I mean? Like, so it can be hard to justify, especially, we feel a lot of time pressure, especially, like I said, you get interrupted all the time, so you're feeling this time pressure, and you're like, I can't justify. You don't get to I guess you could make an issue on GitHub and then like claim it. Look, there, I got one more little square on my contributor. But even if there's no credit in it, that can be tough. But if you have good bosses, they're going to understand that. Like, say, hey, look, I want to save some time. I'm going to save us some money, and then get stuff done quicker and easier, and everybody in a better mood. So you can't go too far with this, I'm sure. Just like anything, you can be like, I'm going to write a whole CMS for how my development environment is, or like I'm going to Dockerize everything or whatever. But that being said, Dockerization is I'm hopeful for. I'm hopeful. It's because that's the major time suck. It seems like is development, getting your development environment up. Even if you know what you're doing, and then you take that and you put it on top of a junior person, it's like, hey, figure out this undocumented thing, this process that takes forever, and only we know how to do it, and then that's terrible experience for them, where they're just sitting there, like, they already got, imposter syndrome, they don't know anybody, they don't know who to ask, how to do anything. So yeah, I think, kind of getting your development environment together into a happy place is going to help just everybody. And then you can make good decisions about architecture instead of be like, well, we just kind of piece it all together and we got this connector and that connector and whatever. It can all just be like, just open it and it works. What? Yeah. So yeah, that's one. And those things can be built into all of our software. That's one that I have a problem with like GitHub, is explaining GitHub to people. I just have to say, like new people, okay, so I teach at a code school, and then I'm like, all right, eventually we're gonna have to talk about GitHub, let's do this now. And then they're like, why? Why is it called that? And I'm like, don't worry about that, it's just terrible, just get over it, just memorize it. Like, memorize how to do this, and maybe you won't erase everything. But it's not, it's all about naming. Like, that's one of the things is, like, these handles on the doors, that's, there are good naming conventions that people do. Well, like Heroku does it pretty well. And it's pretty common what you're doing. It's, pretty obvious. And there are some GitHub things that are obvious, Git things that are obvious. But there's a lot of it that's just like, yeah, I don't know, man. Like reset hard head, like what does that mean? I don't know, dude. So, but there are, like when you clear your terminal, type clear, that makes sense, right? And you don't have to think about it or memorize it. It's just like, hey, you want to clear your terminal? Or like like JavaScript, newer JavaScript It's like string methods. Like, hey, when I ask my students, hey, what's the JavaScript method for when you want to find out if a word starts with something? It starts with, you know, like, all right, we're making progress. But it's like, hey, what does slice do? They're like, slice or splice? You know, like, whatever. You're gonna have to look it up. Just look it up. You're not gonna remember it. And yeah, that's terrible naming, and that's on us, and we can change it. All this stuff that's been done can be changed. And I think that people, especially coming into programming straight out of like college or something, I think that they're just like, this is it, this is all there is, if they don't have experience in different industries, so they can see like, hey, in nuclear, we used to do stuff like this, but then we burned a plant down. And so now we always do this thing with fires and going around with signing off documentation or something like that. And so then they can, you can say, hey, look, we used to do it this way, but now we can make it better. And I feel like, because software is such a new baby industry, it's still very young. I think we lose sight of that because it's moving so fast right now. But that doesn't mean we can't, like, you know, make things better. Anybody got any questions right now? All right. So yeah, here's some things that I was talking about. Creating Gibsonian affordances for ourselves, just basically putting handles on things, making things obvious, naming things correctly, limiting distractions. You know, that's kind of on you to do because, you know, as a worker and as a CEO, I mean, like, my first programming job, my CEO was like, you know, never came by the office unless it was just like, hey, congratulations on doing your race or whatever. But other than that, he just let us go for weeks. But he could just see that the products were getting shipped and everything was going great. And if we needed anything from him, then he would do it. Like, and that's if you have a good team. But, you know, I'm sure we're all on the best teams ever. So, you know, when you have a good CEO or a good boss, whoever's your direct reports and stuff, they can let you go and make stuff, and that really helps. And they can also guard you against against all this noise that you wouldn't otherwise have to do. Limit non-vital decision making. So that's another one where you can just pass it on. Like, just, you know, a lot of decisions it doesn't, you know, just like, what's the fellow who just spoke out there? I really enjoyed his speech, but I can't remember his name. Mike. He was talking about, you know, a lot of times it's just make a decision, you know. That's a lot of stuff. And then we can say, well, for instance, you know, say your company's like, okay, we need to implement automated UI testing. And so you could leave that to your most senior person to do the regression testing and like figure it out, like what's our best path forward. Or again, you could just pass it on to the least experienced person on your team and like try this for 2 weeks and come back and see what you got. And then they could be like, oh, you know, this is where I am. This is what's terrible about it. This is what's great about it. And then boom, you can just make the decision right then. You don't have to like know everything. And because you've got more experience, you can say, oh, we can overcome these obstacles, or that's a deal breaker. So yeah, you can kind of limit that decision making, and yeah. And then taking breaks. I mean, if you're gonna actually get thrown off course and stop work, then at least you'll come back recharged, rather than, you know, just sitting around, you know, getting non-important phone calls. You know, I felt like I did work in an office for this job, and I felt like if I went off to take a walk, then like all the sites were going to crash, and I was the only one who was going to be able to fix them, and the most important phone calls were going to come in, and really it's like if I were to die that day, no, it would have kept going without me. You know, like it's all of us are replaceable, and I can't speak for all of y'all, but none of the stuff that I do like is software on like a pacemaker or is like flying rockets to the moon that I know of. But yeah, and if it is, then they should have double checked themselves, because yeah. So there's none of, and it's not putting out fires. Like, so it's not like actually, none of it's really, if all of the stuff that I'm doing right now never existed, it would still be fine. Like, we are making the world a better place in our different industries. You know, like software serves us and helps to make things easier and to make things better. But yeah, it's not the end of the world. So take a break, come back recharged. You know, maybe take a walk. A walk with not a lot of decisions, like maybe on a walking path instead of like a one that's like got 7 roundabouts in it. So you're like, we're gonna get run over now? What about now? What is that person looking? They're on their phone. You know, like that's not the kind of break you want to take. You want to take an actual chill, relaxed break. Let's see. That's me right there. But it was one of the things I want to talk about. Let's see. Oh yeah, does anyone here? How many of y'all work with like web stuff? Put your hands up. All right. And how many of y'all that does the web stuff? Do y'all have? How many of y'all have brand guides? 2? Okay, cool. Yeah, and then one like kind of, yeah. So that's the one that's like a big deal that companies, they like, oh, why are we doing this? Like, we're not, you know, we're not a frou-frou website, we just have enterprise users or whatever. But I tell you what, that cuts down a ton of decision making, like, hey, what's that color again? Or like, should we do it this color? Is this primary brand color? Whatever, or like, how big should our H1s be? Or, you know, all of these little decisions that it can just be like, boom, here it is right here. You don't have to make this decision ever. Like, you can always cut down all that stuff, and it's going to save you a ton of time. And then you could even like just outsource stuff to designers and be like, here's the brand guide, make me a brochure for this conference or whatever. Or make me a marketing website for our product, and they don't have to be like, oh, how should this product make you feel, and all this, and what are the words that you would use to describe it, and all that stuff. You can have all that done beforehand, and save you a ton of time and a ton of decision making, both for the person asking and for the person having to put up all the answers. And then, so what happens is, really though, is the person asks the question, and then there's this expert over here, and then they have to go talk to the CEO, and then they have to ask that question like, I don't know, and then they ask each other, and it just keeps going in an echo chamber, and eventually, probably the designer's like, you know what, I'll just make one. I'll just make a decision, forget about it. So yeah, with a brand guide, you're kind of like keeping all this extra work from going back and forth. Let's see. Oh yeah, and then one more thing I wanted to kind of point out that's helpful to keep you on track and to help insulate you from extra interruptions is prioritizing. So, you know, like taking that time, either, you know, for me, the brain dead last 30 minutes of work, that's a really good time to do it, where you can like do some, well, you know, I can barely see the screen now, but I can like think of big ideas, or like, what are we doing wrong, or what could we do better next time? And then you can kind of prioritize for the next day or for the next week or whatever. And then, but once you prioritize something, then once you start getting into it, then you know that you're doing the right thing. And then you're not like, should I be doing something else? And like looking through your issues again, like getting on your issues. Then you can just like follow through that thing until then. And once you've decided that's important, someone comes to your office and like, hey, can I speak to you for a minute? And like, hey, can it wait? Yeah, sure. I mean, it can all wait. But yeah, when you know what your value is right then, and you're doing it right then all the other stuff doesn't matter. It's not value to you or to your company. So.